How many kids did you molest with Jeffrey Epstein?
More than just elbows.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean, you start from a prior of conflict and ill will.
Gang, what is up? Aaron here, Canadian Looney. So we have a very interesting piece, hot off the presses. This is Andrew Scheer sticking up for the Conservative Party. This liberal press woke media, it does not do the trick. Andrew Scheer is too smart for that. Following Andrew, we're going to have Jamil Jivani, one of our favorites to watch. He'll bring us back down to earth. Followed up by Rachael Thomas. She's always keen to watch. So let's take a look and a listen. Canadian federal politics. Like, share, subscribe. We work hard at this channel. We're trying to get the information from the politicos that the woke liberals keep shutting down. Like, they just spend more of your tax money, which will lead to inflation, to pay for their media, because nobody wants to report on that at all. Like, the liberals are losers and they're sabotaging your nation. Let's take a look at some of the freedom fighters that we have fighting in the right direction. Let's go. Let's take a peek. Andrew Scheer is one of the funniest guys in the House of Commons. He's not making any jokes here. Jamil Jivani, very serious. So is Rachael Thomas. These liberals are a joke. Let's go. Let's take a look.
Hey, that's something everyone can enjoy.
All right, and we are back here. Andrew Scheer is up for the Conservatives, and we're going to listen into what he's saying ahead of a budget vote today by the Bloc Québécois, and questions as well about a recent resignation of an MP from Edmonton for the Conservatives. Let's listen in.
Decision that I believe came to a head because of these liberal tactics. I believe that Matt Jenner has had to make this decision known earlier because of these liberal pressure tactics that I mentioned. I mean, he's been the victim of some of these liberal source fueled rumors. So he made it very clear that this was a decision that he made some time ago to focus on his family, and I point you to his statement. I think it speaks for itself.
Vous n'êtes pas frustré du tout de voir qu'il y a deux députés conservateurs qui ne veulent plus faire partie de l'équipe.
I'm going to jump in here, do some translation. The question there was, what do you make of the fact that now two Conservative MPs have left the party, or will be? One, Chris D'Entremont, who left to join the Liberals earlier this week. He was a Conservative from Nova Scotia, and now Matt Jenner resigning. Let me hear what Scheer is saying here.
Évidemment, il me manque, je lui manque. I will miss him. Il me manque, merci. Alors, ça c'est le fait avec ça. Monsieur D'Entremont a pris son décision et il lui-même a dit que la raison pour son décision, c'est les grèves personnelles.
So Andrew Scheer is saying D'Entremont left because of his own personal grievances with the party. Matt Jenner is resigning, and I will miss him.
Sorry, did Matt Jenner say that?
We know that he did.
So
how can he stay in your caucus? Can you just respond to that?
How do you know that he did?
How can he stay in your caucus if he was meeting with liberals amid floor crossing rumors? One person in your caucus already crossed the floor. How can you do that?
I take Matt Jenner at his word. I do not take. Are you sure? How do you know? I do not take unnamed liberal sources at the word. I don't respond to rumors.
Surely you would want to know if he met with any liberals. Did you talk to him about that?
I will point you to Mr. Jenner's statements. We had a great conversation yesterday. I think his statement speaks for itself. I think I might have time for one more.
S'il vous plaît, monsieur, qu'est-ce que vous dites aux gens qui pensent que maintenant le leadership de Pierre Poilievre est affaibli en raison de ses départs?
On doit parler de les faits. Les faits. Les faits sont cet gouvernement.
All right, I'm going to jump in here. The question was, what do you think this says about the leadership for Pierre Poilievre?
Non, mais c'est clair. C'est clair, le coût de la vie augmente avec M. Carnage.
It's clear that the cost of living is going up with Mark Carney.
Tout ça doit être payé par les contribuables.
And now there's massive spending in the budget. It's going to have to be paid by Canadian taxpayers.
You stop 100 people in any main street in this country, They are uninterested in palace intrigue. They are uninterested in parliamentary press gallery reporting on liberal-sourced rumors. They are interested in facts that will affect their life. And the facts of this budget are their costs are going to go up. Inflation is already on the rise. Food inflation is already way over budget. There are alarm bells being sounded by everybody from the parliamentary budget officer to the Bank of Canada governor to credit rating agencies saying that the path that Mark Carney has put us on is unsustainable. That's what Conservatives are focused on. We're going to hold this government to account. We're going to fight to bring down prices, and we're not going to let Liberal sources put out rumors to distract from a terrible budget that Canadians are giving a giant thumbs down to. Thank you very much.
They say, Jamil, why do you focus so much on the crisis facing young men? Why do you put petitions out? Why do you write a book on the topic? You know what I say back? Because who else around here is going to do it? That's right. Let's keep it real. Let's go all the way on this one because people need to understand what exactly is going on. Hardcore liberals often want to point out when you talk about boys and young men, why are you only focused on that? No. It's not that I'm only focused on that. It's that the Liberal government isn't focused on it at all. And somebody needs to talk about what's going on around here. You look at every bit of government data and it will show you that boys and young men are disproportionately struggling in Canada today. Government data shows it. Addictions, opioid overdoses, homelessness, violent crime, homicides, high school dropouts, unemployment, all of these issues, economic, social, cultural, show that boys and young men are struggling in Canada today. And nobody in the government wants to talk about it. You want evidence? Let's give you some evidence. How about that? $78 billion deficit put forward by the federal government yesterday. Now, you would think, spending that kind of money, your money, taxpayer money, that they could address every problem under the sun. They should have solutions and ideas for everything going wrong in the country right now. You want to know how many times in the entire $78 billion deficit budget they mention boys or young men? Zero. During a time of crisis for young men in this country, zero mentions of this group of people. This is why I have to talk about it. This is why I have to come to Ottawa and talk about it. Because we have a government that doesn't want to do a thing, even when spending $78 billion deficits, they don't want to do anything about it. This is wild stuff. And this is what I need people across our country to understand. We have to fight for the people this government wants to turn its back on. We have to fight for the people that this government wants to ignore, neglect, and marginalize. And unfortunately, that's a lot of Canadians being treated this way by Mark Carney and his team of Liberals here in Ottawa. Let me explain this a bit more. They go so far. This is some audacious stuff. Even I was surprised. Not a lot surprising me around here. I was surprised by this one. They acknowledge that over the last decade, educational attainment has been unequal in Canada. They acknowledge that in the budget. For 10 years, boys have been less likely to graduate from high school, to get a university degree, to get post-secondary training. They acknowledge that in the budget. Now, if you're going to point that out, right, which is something we have pointed out, you would think they'd have some kind of solution for that. They'd want to help these boys do better in the school system, but they don't. In fact, they mention it only then to point a finger back at the same boys and young men and say, well, even though they're not getting the same level of education, they're overrepresented in the field of STEM, and therefore your tax dollars need to be spent to correct that, but not to actually help the boys and young men who are dropping out of school. Not to help the boys and young men who can't finish college or university. Not to help the boys and young men who cannot get a job. Even when they acknowledge the crisis, it's not to actually help resolve the issue. It's only to double down on the same failed policies and failed strategies that view gender one way. No. You want to know? Let me explain one way. Let me explain. We have a ministry here in Ottawa, an entire government department called the Ministry of Women and Gender Equality. Oh, $660.5 million in new funding. Funding again, your taxpayer dollars. Now, gender equality, that sounds like if young men are struggling with addiction, if young men are not finishing high school, if young men are more likely to be unemployed, that seems like a gender equality issue, no? Let's get it down to 50-50, shall we? No. Not with these guys in charge here in Ottawa. When they say gender equality, they're not talking about boys and young men. In fact, of that money, none of it is earmarked to support boys and young men. When they say gender equality, they're not talking about the majority of young Canadians who are struggling. They're not talking about the mental health crisis affecting boys. They're not talking about the fact that over 2/3 of the young Canadians dying by suicide right now are boys. They're not talking about helping with that. What they're talking about is funding the same old way of thinking about gender in this country. I say none of this to say that this is an either-or thing. Do we need funding to support young women and girls? Absolutely. But the reason I focus on what's happening with boys and young men is because the government doesn't want to even talk about it. And when they do, they use it to justify the 10-year record of failed policies they've already had, so they don't lift a single finger to help a struggling boy or a struggling young man in this country. When the hardcore liberals try to point out that when I say this stuff, that they want to make it seem like I'm being divisive. No, they are being divisive. These hardcore liberals are telling you every day that some people deserve more help in this country than others, that some people's problems deserve more government attention than others. And what I'm saying is, why can't we help everybody? Why do we have to make it seem like it's a choice? Why do we have to rank people? Why can't being a young Canadian be enough that your government respects you and feels responsible to help you? That's my point. That's my message. And that's what I wish I saw when I looked at this $78 billion deficit budget, but I don't see it. You know, we are looking at a situation here, especially, I want to point out the addiction issue in particular, because everyone across Canada, we all know somebody, a friend, a family member, we all know somebody who's struggling with this stuff. Opioids have flooded into our country over the last decade. People need help. Addiction and substance abuse, toxicity deaths, emergency room visits, all disproportionately affect men in this country. And if you want to take the addiction issue seriously, you cannot leave boys and young men out. You can't. In the entire 493-page budget document, addiction is mentioned one time. One time in 493 pages. And they don't mention giving more support for that to help Canadians get through it. Instead, they just say no additional funding will be provided. When you see these crazy, wild monopoly man numbers, $78 billion deficit, I know it sounds like such a large amount of money. It's hard to even realize what that even looks like. But at minimum, when you hear that much of your money, that much of your taxes is being spent by the government, you deserve your problems to be solved and addressed, and that is the problem, is it's not happening. We will continue fighting for boys and young men in this country. We will continue fighting for all Canadians being ignored, neglected, and marginalized by the Liberal government here in Ottawa.
I think it is extraordinary that Mark Carney has become the Prime Minister of Canada. He did a terrible job in Britain.
What? Oh, yeah.
Well, folks, the Liberals have just tabled their 2025 budget. It is something that Carney has dubbed as a generational budget. Here it is, folks. I would argue that the only thing generational about it is the fact that it creates a massive debt load that will get passed on from one generation to the next. If that is his goal, then kudos to Mark Carney. He has achieved his generational budget. Let's talk about it for just a moment. The Liberals, they've been in power for 10 years, and year over year, election after election, they ask Canadians to just trust them a little bit longer. Things will get better. But when we look at what has happened over the last 10 years, that's not the case. Things have actually gotten worse. We know that the debt load has doubled. We know that the cost of housing has doubled. We know that the lineups at food banks have doubled. This evening, when Mr. Carney tabled that budget, it is more than just dollars and cents. It is actually putting forward a vision for the country. And so I think it's important for us to look at what that vision is. I would argue that for this Liberal government, it is filled with debt, it is filled with higher taxes, and it is filled with more costs to Canadians. I would contend that Canadians deserve better, that you deserve more. The Liberals promised that they would change their ways, that they would rein in their spending. Mark Carney, touted himself as this great fiscal manager. But in fact, what we see in this budget is very different than that. Justin Trudeau, in his last budget, his deficit was about $42 billion. In this budget, Mark Carney's budget, the deficit is almost $80 billion. 80. So it's almost double what Justin Trudeau had. The important thing to remember here is it's not just a number. It means something. This year alone, the interest payment on Canada's debt is expected to be in the realm of $53.4 billion. $53.4 billion is going to be spent just on servicing the debt. So that's just the interest payment. To put this into perspective, this is more than what we spend on Canadian healthcare for those in the entire country. This is more than what the federal government transfers to the provinces. That's crazy. When the government spends money it doesn't have, we all suffer because it either means increased taxes or it means cutbacks to programs that we appreciate, such as healthcare. Conservatives have a different vision, a vision that puts people at the forefront. We called on the government to provide an affordable budget for an affordable life. We called on the government to do a few things, simple things, that would help serve Canadians really well. We asked them to scrap the hidden taxes within our food costs. So for example, the current government under Mark Carney has put in place an industrial carbon tax. That tax is paid by farmers who produce our food. Of course, that tax gets passed on to us at the grocery store when we go to purchase those food items. So let's scrap that. Let's bring back affordability. In addition to that, we asked that they would stop the inflation tax by bringing the deficit under control. Well, we learned tonight that's not going to be the case. Instead, this government is going to continue to print money. Well, when the government prints money, it drives up the cost of everything, from food to housing to home heating to the fuel that we put in our vehicles, the clothing that we wear. Everything goes up in cost when the government decides it's going to print money. And they just announced tonight that they're going to be printing a whole lot of it. Thirdly, we asked them to unleash our economy by unlocking natural resource development across the country. And there are simple laws that can be scrapped in order to accomplish this. Bill C-69, Bill C-48 would unleash the energy sector, the natural resource sector as a whole, and allow us to move forward in this area by providing great jobs and, of course, pumping more money into the economy. Every Canadian deserves a government that puts people first. And putting people first means increasing affordability. Increasing affordability by cutting taxes, not adding new taxes to pay for the government's out-of-control spending and growing debt load. So, on behalf of all Canadians who can no longer afford to eat or heat or house themselves, my Conservative colleagues and I cannot, in good conscience, vote for today's budget. We cannot. Instead, we must continue fighting for Canadians and for affordability measures, and we're going to do just that.
Oh, yeah.
I personally find it very confusing how any liberal voter, like, I'm sure you're naive, like, it's okay to be duped. I've been duped. I voted for Trudeau in 2015, believe it or not. So it was a big mistake. I wasn't watching or paying attention then, but I have been paying very close attention since 2023. And let me tell you, these guys don't care about your future. They want your money in their pockets, your future, your kids' future, your grandchildren's futures in their pockets. See what they're doing to Canada with immigration. See what they're doing with housing. Check out what they're doing with our health care. What is better than it was in 2015? Absolutely nothing. It's confusing to me. On a lighter note, my name's Aaron. This is Canadian Loony. I work very hard at this channel, and believe me, I'm not a conservative. I will be voting that way. It seems to be the only way to get out from underneath this liberal conspiracy to destroy our way of being. And if you think like, oh, I don't want to admit that I was fooled or that I was raised liberal, so I'm still a liberal, change it up, because they have no plans for your future except lining their pockets with your tax dollars, laundering that money, spending it in other places so Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau, all these hack bullshit ministers can get richer on your coin under the guise of being incompetent or negligent. Like, it's not that. They mean to be doing what they're doing, and they're pulling it off. There is no future for Canada under this government. So I watch all the committee meetings. I watch everything that happens in the House of Commons. I also follow the propaganda-driven news of the legacy media that is paid for by this government to dissuade your mind into some kind of trick to think that they're doing it for the benefit of you. It's not for you. Liberal voters, I'm speaking right to you. Please watch the politics, not the news. Like, watch the independents on YouTube. Do anything other than what you're doing, because if you're still being duped and not aware that you're being fooled, that's a huge issue. My name's Aaron. This is Canadian Loony. Like, share, subscribe. I work very hard at this channel. Believe it or not, I spend 12 hours a day, 7 days a week at this, because it takes a lot of time to watch all of the politics. But that is where you get your real information. So I would appreciate your subscription. I know that a lot of people that watch this channel, 60% of the people that watch my channel aren't subscribed. I need you to subscribe. I'd like you to subscribe. I'm asking for that because this stuff is so censored, which is a part of legacy media, that it's hard to get any kind of word out. I know that there's other platforms. Just go to that. I know that a lot of people, liberal voters, watch YouTube, and I'm hoping they'll catch some of this and become informed. Learn a little more, because again, it's not a liberal conservative thing. It's an evil versus good thing. I'm not a conservative. Like, I will be voting that way because we need to get out from underneath this elephant that keeps squashing us. It's ridiculous. Please like, share, subscribe, get notified. Come check out one of our live shows. We cover Canadian federal politics right there, and I think you'd enjoy our chat room. It's the best that I've seen online. That's it, Aaron, Canadian Loony. Like, share, subscribe. We'll catch you in the next video. We're gonna wrap it up right here. Out for now. Thanks for watching.